This presentation will discuss Power of Myth, Chapter 5, in which Joseph Campbell talks about heroes and the good life. As we go through some of Campbell's ideas, one should think about current day myths and operant myths in your own life. Think about hero stories, which are often the topics that myths cover, and look at some other motifs and themes that Campbell presents here. I'm not at all looking to criticize anyone's belief or their practice of religion any more than Campbell did. He was afraid that looking at myths would threaten his students' belief systems, but what he found was the opposite. Often students actually understand their beliefs better after studying myths. So there's really no danger in looking at the symbolic stories that help us understand ourselves and our experiences of life. We actually get a deeper understanding of story and its role in our lives. My personal experience with Gen Z has been a bit different, since many of that generation comes to me with little experience of organized religion, and they often don't know the stories, even to be able to engage in the metaphorical analyses we attempt to address in this course. That said, I encourage all of you to look at modern day religions and myths of the organized religions, whether you belong to one or not, and look at another living religion of today, especially if you don't feel comfortable considering your own religion from a more objective mythological perspective. If you can think of a story that forms your understanding of something, or that helped you work through some problem you were having in life, that story might be an operant myth, which is a mythic story that you operationalize, sometimes without even associating the learning from the symbol to the actual story. A few other questions to consider are: how does this myth fit within your religion or your cosmological perspective? What other myths are at work in your life that come from your culture? Is there a culturally determined monomyth? Campbell tells us that the hero story, which has two different versions, the physical deed, in which the hero must perform a courageous act, or the spiritual deed, where the hero must learn something spiritual and bring back a message, has a monomythic essence. We all love hero stories, and those stories follow a common trajectory. The hero lacks something, must go after that on a journey, endure a number of tests to return changed, more mature, and more responsible. Campbell's assertion of the monomyth, for which he is criticized, may be because it lacks the imagination of the variation on the themes possible in the infinite array of possible narratives. However, Campbell admits that this reductionist approach does not account for all of it, but understanding it can help us get greater insight into both our physical reality as well as the metaphysical possibilities. We can all see ourselves reflected in these stories. So you are the hero of that monomythic story. If you consider your own life, you have embarked on many journeys of discovery. Consider how your own life conforms to the monomyth. Or maybe you are right now in the middle of a journey, experiencing the trials necessary to change for the better. There is also the leader hero who saw what needed to be seen and made it happen. This hero sacrifices themselves for something greater, a moral objective of saving a group, another person, or sacrifices for an idea. Like Spider-Man in No Way Home, sacrificing his relationships for the restoration of order in the world, or Iron Man, or this is an example of the hero leader story. There is also the father hero that we see in modern film like Star Wars, a child on the father quest. Because life evokes character, one journeys to be in situations that evoke a higher nature. Today's hero on this quest for character, the father quest, as Campbell calls it, finds the world unresponsive to their spiritual needs. We also see more seeking of the mother or parents, such as in Harry Potter, in film as well, but Campbell doesn't address this from back in 1986. How do science and mythology compare, according to Campbell? He sees them as not in conflict. As science begins to break through to new mysteries, the edge simply keeps moving out between what is known and what can never be discovered. And as I've said many times, science can never answer the question of why. Campbell in the 1980s laments the transition out of the old religions or old stories that don't have sway in life and therefore cannot communicate purpose, lack emotional influence which guide us in those stories, no longer canonized. Why? Well, Campbell would argue as the God stories become codified, they reduce theology to a story, a finite, imprecise language, or limited in scope. After all, how can a finite being understand the eternal? And that may be why the idea of God being literally up there as a bearded old bird or as a flying spaghetti monster makes religion a prose that lacks the poetry of creativity and limits action to literal ways of being. Perhaps that is why religion is being lost in the 21st century, and maybe so. But the loss is a loss of mythic story and its significance and ability to unite as well. Campbell comes across throughout his books as against organized religion of any kind, appreciating for himself a more Buddhist or pantheistic approach from my limited perspective of reading him. He says, I think that anyone brought up in an extremely strict authoritative social situation is unlikely ever to come to the knowledge of himself. How true is what he says about theology versus myth for you? As myself, someone who was brought up somewhat that way, I must disagree, but unfortunately that is not the experience of many of the Gen Z students I have. Either way, I do agree that the loss is the loss of a group of meaningful stories that help us to understand ourselves, and at a minimum, that is a shame. What do you think of Campbell's perspective on religion limiting the person's ability to cope today and come to know themselves? Something to consider. Campbell, in chapter 5 of Power of Myth, also gives us a sense of a variety of other subjects, such as the good teacher. His opinion prefigures how teachers are expected to be in the early 21st century. Wise teachers who see the possibilities in the young and give advice and general clues on how to reach some satisfaction. Even the good novelist can be a good teacher. In modernity, Campbell credits the myth making to the everyday wise artists, writers, and movie makers. Can we find the modern day myths in modernity? What is humanity working out today in its literature? Is Campbell merely a literary critic? One of the features of Campbell is his analysis of Star Wars, as George Lucas cited Campbell's teaching about the hero's journey as being very influential on the work. While we have a deeper understanding of Darth Vader than Campbell could have had, not having seen the second trilogy, he sees Vader as a bureaucrat, a robot with an underdeveloped humanity. Your choice is to follow your heart or to do what's required of you. The Force is the power of life, which you have direct access to at any time, as long as you know how to access it. Interaction with the Force is unmediated. The new Star Wars movies have seen the destruction of the Jedi Order and religion. Here's a spoiler alert, so pause it here and fast forward to the next slide if you don't want to hear what's next. But in the newest movies, the sacred texts are burned by Yoda as he laughs and says that it's time for something new. This is not just a break from George Lucas after he sold the franchise. It's a many-layered analysis of life and death and resurrection unto new life. Darth Vader is in all of us. We are all Darth Vader. In the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Game of Thrones may be seen to represent the modern view of the hero, which is that they all die. In the end, no one ever wins. But if they are resurrected in Game of Thrones, watch out. Live the good life as defined for today. But what is that? What does it mean for you? Do you want to live that life? Is that life prescribed by society? And will you follow it, or will you break from the social expectations and founder, or will you create something new? Myths inspire us to perfection, to fruition. And while we learn them as children, we don't realize the many layers of meaning that are almost infinite in the revelations. Myths teach and help us formulate things, understand things. Myths are metaphorical poetry of the good life, which are narrative signs with infinitely layered meanings of the good life. Power of Myth chapter 5 has many other things there. It's worth reading if you haven't done so yet.